recording. There we go. And so, hi, everyone. Welcome to the April Mastermind squad, which is actually only 2 people. So I'm going to call Dunn the Mastermind, and I'll just be like the sidekick. We did have somebody else, but he wasn't able to make it. So we're now streaming live in the Hypnotherapy Uncensored Facebook group. And this whole thing will be going up on YouTube later. So if you don't want your face on YouTube, then you might want to turn off your video. So Dunn Kaufman is with us, and he is a computer programmer turned psychotherapist who now integrates clinical hypnosis and hypnotherapy into his practice. He's married with 6 little kids, I might add, ages 1 through 10. He lives in Toronto and works with clients all over the world from Hawaii to Hong Kong. We also did have Bob Burns scheduled to join us as well, because they both work with fears and phobias really well. And that was going to be the whole theme, but something unexpectedly came up for Bob, and he sends his love and says he's sorry, but he will be back with us very soon. I told him we all send him our love too. And so the format here is a very casual roundtable style discussion where I will be asking Dunn various questions that have come up from our Facebook group members. And actually, we only have a couple this time. So think of questions, because we're going to have time for them. And I can, of course, like fill in a few myself. And if there is time at the end, Dunn, anything that you might want to promote about whatever you're doing right now in the world, please feel free to do that. If you have any links that you would like to add into the chat for people to check out stuff that you're doing, please feel free to do that too. And then at the very end, just so that you can have a chance to kind of think about it, I'm going to ask you, what is the most unexpected, most bizarre, phenomenal, sort of craziest thing that's ever happened, either in session or as a result of a session with you? And then, as always, if you guys feel like you benefit from these monthly or bi-monthly events, feel free to kick in $2 of notes of appreciation to yours truly for all of the behind the scenes stuff that I do for these. And so take it away, Dunn. I would like to just start with, I have actually heard your protocol for phobias is really good. Desiree had mentioned that, so I would love to hear about that. And if you could all mute yourselves, that would be great.
I would love to hear. So the actual protocol itself came about completely by accident. I had a client in my office just prior to COVID for intense social anxiety disorder, to the point where he was in his mid-40s, a number of kids, extremely successful, but successful through emails and phones, meaning that him and his partner, every time they would go into a meeting, he would just sort of freeze. If somebody asked him simple questions like, hi, my name is Steve, what's your name? He would completely stutter and not even give a sensible response, right? He gave me an example where somebody literally said to him, hi, my name is Steve, what's your name? And he said, yes, right? And now we're talking about an adult man who's exceptionally successful, multi-million dollars in his pocket at the end of the year, and yet he just couldn't socially just be present. And I was so fascinated by him that before I knew it, I kept probing him and asking him questions. Before I knew it, there was about 10 minutes left to our session. I was like, uh-oh, I gotta do something here. And my segue into hypnosis and hypnotherapy has always been through visualizations. And so I decided just to do a visualization exercise with him. And that's really where the protocol came from. And he came back to me the next week, because we planned, 3 to 4 week sessions. I'll mute them. Oh. And then he came back to me the next week and he said, yep, I'm cured. I was like, what do you mean? He said, after I left your office the next day, I had a business meeting. I walked in. I was like totally chill and cool. My partner thought I was drunk because I was just like so with it. Then that evening, I had a social gathering with 150 people, 10 people to a table. Says, generally my worst nightmare. And I was just like, the life of the party. I saw somebody across the table from me who kind of looked what I would have looked like just 2 days ago. So I sat next to him. I started chatting with him. making him feel comfortable. And I was so thoroughly confused because I was like, this is not the way it's supposed to be. Right. And thankfully, I've started to appreciate that there is nothing is the way it's supposed to be. The human mind is so suggestible and so amazing that anything is possible. So I explored this protocol that I did with him, and I over a number of months honed it down, experimented with different ways, and then eventually came up with a very specific protocol that seems to work almost very, very consistently, if not the first time, within 2 or 3 sessions. And the protocol is very, very simple. There's no formal induction. It's just a couple of deep breaths just to relax the individual. And Chris, if you want, I'll just walk through the process right now.
Yeah. And then I will turn it into like something that I can post in the group, unless you already have a PDF or something that we can add later.
No problem.
That would be great. Yeah.
So the process is very simple. And after I had honed it, I actually got about 150 therapists across the world I just wanted to give over the protocol completely for free, just to see, are other people getting the same results as me? Or is it just, is it me or is it the process? And thankfully we got very similar results as well.
Always a really good thing to find out. And I'm so glad that you touched upon that, because I'm guessing this is your psychotherapeutic background and making sure that you have adequate research and you're pulling out the extraneous variables. And so I very much appreciate that, because sometimes it's the actual therapist and not the protocol at all. So thank 100%. You for making that distinction.
And it's actually very interesting because there's a lot of therapeutic frameworks like cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, that they've shown that even with really poor rapport between therapist and client, the results are still very effective. Versus some other ones that are more humanistic or where the rapport needs to be high for the therapy to actually be successful. So, both. Same thing happened with EMDR. There's a lot of research that shows that it's still successful even when the rapport is very low between therapist and client, meaning that there is strength in the protocol as well. So this protocol is very, very simple. 3 deep breaths in, just to get the person to relax. If their eyes are closed, fantastic. You just say, you know what, keep your eyes closed and keep that going until we're finished. If their eyes aren't closed, you can just ask them gently to close their eyes at that point. And very simply, you start off by saying this, and you sort of give them a debriefing. Sorry, I missed probably the 2 most important things. Prior to the conversation, the pre-frame I found to be exceptionally important. And the 2 things that I give over to all of the clients is this. 2 main points that they have to be able to understand, agree with. And if they don't, then we can have that conversation. One of which is the brain does not know the difference between what's real and what's not. And the way that I normally give them that experience, individuals, to try and understand what I mean by that is I give them a story about a client who I had who had a fear of heights. And I actually have this here. I have a pair of VR goggles in my office for virtual exposure therapy as well. And I put on a drone video footage, 360 degrees, of a drone flying up to Angel Falls in Venezuela, which is the tallest waterfall in the world. It's so high that the water actually never reaches the ground. It just evaporates into mist before it reaches the ground. That's how high it is. And so I put on a video, and the drone started taking off the ground, very pretty much the height of just above human height. And my client just started shaking in his chair. I could see his chest sort of popping out of his shirt. I was like, this is not going well, and I don't want to have a heart attack in my office. So I ripped off the goggles. Now what happened? Meaning, he knows he walked into my office. He knows he's not flying up anywhere, right? Yet just the brain was fooled into believing something that wasn't real. And for people who have never experienced virtual reality, the example that I give is, how many times have we woken up from a dream, either a good one or a bad one, right? Just for a moment being like, whoa, that was very real, right? Like, especially at a nightmare, you wake up in like a jolt or in a sweat. So again, what happened? None of it is real, quote unquote, yet our brains believe that it's real, so much so that they will go through all the processes of affecting the physiological part of our bodies. That's part 1. part two is, so now that we know that the brain can't tell the difference, the second part of all of this is we can change things instantly. Now, it's hard to believe, right? But then I give the example of trauma, an acute trauma, right? So I give the story of my mother who's been driving for like 40 years. And then one evening after, dark, she was making a left-hand turn and the street light was burnt out. She didn't see a pedestrian crossing. And unfortunately, she hit the pedestrian. Thankfully, nothing happened to him, nothing happened to the car. But from that moment, right, she could not get into a car at nighttime. What happened to the 40 years of driving experience? No problems whatsoever. Just like that, right? She's essentially creating, not by choice, right? But the experience plus the emotional intensity of the experience together create an acute trauma where now she's just like, I'm not getting into a car at nighttime. So, and a lot of people know, I shared also that I had a friend who he watched 9/11 on TV and he would not get on an airplane ever since. Right? He was just watching it. He wasn't even experiencing anything, but it was so jolting to his system that he will not get into an airplane. And this has made his life extremely debilitating because he would about 3 or 4 times a year go and visit his children in New York by airplane. And now he has to make the 12, 16-hour drive wherever they live, every single time now. So the reason why I bring this up is because just like how our brains can create a situation because of a trauma, instantly changing your way of being, I don't have a good term for it yet, and I'm totally open to it, but I say what we're going to do in our session today is we're going to create a good trauma. We're going to create such a compelling version of what you want to have happen that we're going to have the scenario plus the positive intensity of it together is going to now overrule any other story you would have had in the past. And I need the buy-in from the clients before I can continue, because if they don't understand or believe either one of those points, I've seen that it just doesn't work. So now I have the buy-in and I say, okay, you ready to begin? Yes. Now I also explain to them, after I sort of do the intake and understand what exactly we're working with, there's always a safe point, no matter what the anxiety or phobia is. So let's say we have a phobia of dogs, right? Meaning if you're at home, if you're out for a walk in the park, you're feeling pretty good. The moment you hear a dog or hear his footsteps or see a dog coming, that's when our nervous system starts going. Meaning at one point we're safe, then there's something changes, we're not safe anymore. And then there's some point after the fact that we're safe again, right? I call it the safety Oreo, right? So I always say to them, when we're about to start the process, I want you to always start when you're still in a safe mode, right? There's no excitement yet. So if we were to go through the scenario of the dog or the client where I actually started this process, for him, it was him sitting at his desk. And he told me that the moment he opens the door to the meeting room or to a social gathering, that's when he just starts sweating profusely. He's got a napkin, he carries a napkin or had carried a napkin in his pocket at all times to wipe away the sweat. So for him, it was prior to opening up that door. So the protocol is very simple. And there's a lot of science that I discovered after the fact, why this works. And also a lot of people have told me that there's a lot of NLP practice that's very similar to this process as well. So again, eyes are closed now. They took a few deep breaths. And all I asked them to do is, I want you to imagine while you're still safe, right? So starting off where you're safe, go through the scenario that normally is scary, but the way that you want it to be, your ideal version of what that looks like. You're safe in my office right now or in your home, right? There's no threat here. Just totally in your head, let's play out that scenario. And when you finish that scenario, meaning that now the scenario is over and you're feeling, totally safe again, then you can either just, raise your finger if we're doing it virtually, nod your head, just say done, any sort of indication. I don't want them to open their eyes again. I don't want it to sort of come out from whatever state of relaxation they're in. So as minimal of an interaction as possible. This is the component that I think a lot of people compare to different elements in NLP, which is, in general, I'm doing this process 3 times. So the second time I say to them, okay, we're going to do that again. And they don't know how many times we're going to do it. So for them, it's just, okay, we're doing it again. This time, make it bigger, louder, more real. And again, whenever you're done, just put up your finger. So they're just there. Now, most people who do this, they do the process within a few seconds. Some people will take a little bit longer, a half a minute, 1.5 minutes. I'd probably say that's 99% of the people. Then I had so far only one experience where a woman literally took about 15 minutes per cycle, which was, I had to, because of timing, I had to actually break her off, and I was like, oh, this is not going to go well. And then after the second time, I say, okay, we're going to do this one last time. So now that they know that this is the last time they're going to do it. And again, I say, this time you're going to make it as big, as real, as loud, as just intense and real as you could possibly make it. And whenever you're done, again, just raise your finger. So now we've done this 3 times. And this final part of the protocol I got from Mike Mandel. I don't know if he came up with it, but it's genius. For any work that I do, I always include this part, which is, now that you have a new piece of software, take as long or as little or as long as you'd like to install that software, to update it. And whenever you're done, just come back to the here and the now. And pretty much every single person, at least in North America or in the English-speaking world, has had some experience, be it their phone, their computer, that something needs to be updated or a new piece of software. So they have that metaphor, that awareness that, hey, there's something new coming in and it's supposed to be better. Right? If we're updating our software or installing new software, it's meant to make our lives better. That's why it's doing it. Right? It's getting rid of old stuff, and now we're doing the new stuff. And that's it. I don't discuss anything after the fact, right? I just bring them back to the here and now, shake it off, right? And that's it. I completely switch topics, like, oh, the weather's supposed to, hold out for the next week, right? You said you had a dog. What's its name? I totally just completely, as if we just didn't do anything. And I always say to them, when we book our session, again, this is based on my research, I try and get whatever it is that they are afraid of, that they're going to experience this thing either because they have the ability to, meaning, if it's, let's say, a dog phobia, they can go to a dog park. If it's a needle phobia, they can go get their COVID shot, right? Something that they can do ideally within 24 hours. And it sort of has a diminishing return on investment. So the longer the time between our session and the time that they're going to be exposed to it, there seems to be a diminishing return on investment. Ideally, I never want them to do it right away, but I do want them to do it ideally within a few hours. And I always ask them, please give me a text or, shoot me off an email, a text whenever you've done it, and whenever, just letting me know how it went. And 9 times out of 10, just after that first session, I get a response saying, hey, it worked like a charm. Thank you so much. And that's that. Once in a while, we'll need to reaffirm it, meaning do it, 2 or 3 times. But generally speaking, it seems to be working consistently without any formal inductions. And my biggest problem with this protocol that I've discussed this with others is, unfortunately, it's very short. And the other unfortunate part of it is that it doesn't lend itself to residual income from the same client, meaning, right, like it's like a one-off purchase. And then the other part of it is, how do you squeeze, like depending on your model, coming from a psychotherapist sort of world, my general model is the 55-minute hour. And, if we're finished within 12 minutes, then what did we do for the rest of the time? But those are good problems to have.
Yeah.
But essentially, that's the protocol in a nutshell. As I said, I've had similar results from about 150 people across the world on 5 different continents using this. I'm still looking in the process. I had a bit of a hiatus in my own life, having two children very close to each other in the last year and a half. But I'm still in the process of getting funding to do a proper research and getting a research paper done on this protocol as well, because it seems to have a very high success rate. And I know that, at least going back from the psychotherapist world again, the competition is not so impressive. What I mean by that is, if you take a look at therapeutic models, like CBT is what they call the gold standard in the therapeutic world. They call it an evidence-based therapy, meaning that there's a lot of research showing the validity of it and the reliability of it. Unfortunately, though, for things like social anxiety disorder, right, we're talking about a success rate, which means that they do not have the diagnosis anymore of social anxiety disorder, a success rate of something like 12.5%. At the same time, using therapies like CBT, there, compared to at least a control group, there is about a 70% decrease in symptoms, meaning that you're still going to benefit from it 100%. You're going to feel a lot better than you did before you started. But do you really need 12 sessions, right, at $150 a session over 3 months just to feel a little bit better, when protocols like this or NLP or hypnotherapy can have very similar results, if not better, within 15, 20 minutes. So that's,
Well, you just answered a question that I had, which was, your perception of the difference between a psychotherapeutic approach and a hypnotic approach, and yeah, CBT being like the gold standard. What about dialectical? Have you sort of looked into that at all as compared to hypnosis and hypnotherapy?
for which
phobias and
disorder
fears,
specifically?
or
Sorry?
paranoia, phobias, fears, that sort of thing.
The general research shows that CBT, DBT, all of those are the two biggest ones, have a 60 to 70% success rate. And again, the way that we're defining success is reduced symptoms, not necessarily getting rid of the diagnosis. For things like social anxiety disorder, CBT or MBCT, along with exposure therapy, increases that. But I was shocked when I found out that, like, what we're calling the gold standard is barely a pass, right? Like, if you get a 60% in university, you're failing, like you're not graduating, right? And yet all of these insurance companies are saying, yep, we're giving the thumbs up, and we're going to spend millions and tens of millions of dollars, through insurance money to try and get you help, even though we know that there's a pretty good chance that you're still always going to have this diagnosis. Yeah. To me, I was shocked.
Well, not to sound overly paranoid, but perhaps that's somewhat by design, because then the pharmaceutical industry can kick in, get a little bit more too. But anyway, that being said, I was going to ask, I didn't catch whether or not you find out what the initial sensitizing event is. I think maybe I
don't care.
Okay, it doesn't matter. It's more just about the symptoms.
So I'll tell you something. There's a professor named Martin Seligman. He, in the 1960s, started a psychology called positive psychology, which is very misleading by the title, right? Meaning it sounds like, hey, happiness, right? Like that's not really what the psychology is about. What they ended up discovering originally when they started doing some tests, and their tests you can't get away with nowadays because they use dogs originally. Now they've switched over to mice. But originally what they ended up doing was they had three sets of dogs. One set of dog was in a cage with a little barrier in the middle, and they would shock the dog and the dog would jump over. The second and the third groups, they did the same thing to the second group. And the third group, the dogs had a harness on them so that every time the second group got buzzed, the third group also got buzzed, but no matter what the third group did, it wouldn't turn off. It seemed random that it got turned off. And what happened with the third group is that they found out that these dogs would eventually just like sit down and buckle and wait for the buzz to stop, because they felt like no matter what I did, I'm just going to get buzzed, and no matter what I do, it's not going to help. And they deemed this something called learned helplessness. Then going back about 10 years now, now that technology got a lot better, they were able to start figuring things out. Hey, what's happening in the actual brains of these mice when we're doing similar studies? And can we change that? So they found that what happens is that there's a part of the midbrain called the dorsal raphe nucleus that gets triggered. And that's how we end up learning helplessness or hopelessness. Martin Seligman associates that greatly with depression, but it also is very much with things like phobias and anxieties. No matter what I do, it doesn't matter, right? Meaning I can breathe into a bag when I'm on the airplane, but I'm going to still die, right? That dog is still going to attack me, right? I'm still going to hit a pedestrian every time I go out at nighttime. So whatever it is, we're stuck. It's, we've created this mold and like, that's it. And they believed back in the 60s that once you learned helplessness, you're stuck in that way for life. Unless what they ended up seeing is that unless an external person physically took the dog and moved its legs, would the dogs try again? But if they encouraged the dog by pushing the dog or doing something else, nothing. Meaning that they had to physically show the dog that you have an option, but the dog would not try something on its own, even with treats or other rewards or anything like that. Now, what they ended up doing with mice is, again, going back to nowadays with technology, they started probing different parts of the mice's brain to see what's happening. And they ended up finding that there's a part of our prefrontal cortex, what's called the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, the middle underside part of our prefrontal cortex, that when that part gets activated, it actually turns off the dorsal raphe nucleus. Now, we can't probe human brains, right, to get them out of depression. So they started trying to figure out, okay, what are some exercises that are out in the world, right, mental exercises that we can do in order to activate this part of the brain. And one of the things that they found that was the most effective was visualizations. So if you're visualizing a scenario that's compelling, it actually turns off the part of the brain that's telling you and releasing the chemicals that's keeping you stuck. And so I only discovered this, his research post this, but it explains why this process works extremely well, right? At least from a scientific standpoint. Meaning wow. There's no magic here. It's all based on science.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's fascinating. I actually have a client who's going through something that I think, I don't know, maybe you can help me with this, but she's having all sorts of massive physical symptoms. We've finally got, some of them to calm down and some of them to be completely eliminated. But it turns out that a lot of what was going on is that she really doesn't want to move, but she has to move. She has to relocate geographically to a whole different country. And she's an elderly.
Not you, are we talking about?
Nope, I'm not the elderly woman that I'm talking about.
You didn't say elderly the first time.
No, and I'm not moving across to a different country. I'm just moving across the country. But no, it's she and her husband. And so that one thing, like even if I have her visualize best case scenario, like she just doesn't want to do it. How would you, and it is manifesting as a major fear, like she's having massive adrenaline, cortisol spikes, all of the fight or flight stuff, not sleeping, waking up in a panic, all that stuff. What would you do?
If she's hesitant to do it, I would just say that you would probably need to get her into a deeper state of relaxation, a deeper trance.
She actually goes into a really deep state of trance very easily, and all of her symptoms go away for a few days. Every session we have, and then they come back again. And what we've done is we've isolated everything else out, and sort of dwindled that down. And this is the last remaining thing, but it's also the one thing that like really can't change because it has to happen. And she's just kicking and fighting it at that deeper subconscious level.
And so I would say try this protocol with her when she's in a deep trance. And then the other part of it, going back to
what would you have her visualize though is the thing, because she doesn't like, that's what I'm trying to figure out is, if I say visualize best case scenario, I don't even think she can picture that.
Then I would probably chunk it into smaller pieces, meaning like what are her fears? Right? Is it actually getting on an airplane? Is it packing up? Is it leaving? Like, what are the actual fears?
It seems to be the starting over part.
they're starting over. So
Yeah, but everything that she's like encountering as her house is getting emptied out and packed up is re-triggering that over and over and over multiple times a day.
What's going to happen over there.
Mm-hmm.
Meaning I'm seeing myself or my husband or whoever packing up the boxes. It's like, oh my goodness. And she's automatically jumping to,
yeah.
So what I would do is I would probably start with either the boxes, right? Meaning wherever her triggers are right now, I would start with that. And then I would start with the end result of what's happening over there that she's so afraid of. Right? Is she afraid that it's not going to work out and they're going to end up on the street? Is it like, does she want to know the language? Like what are her actual fears over there?
Mm-hmm.
And in theory, it could, kind of like a Jenga puzzle, if you get the right piece, the whole thing falls apart. But if that doesn't work, I would go in sequential order of saying, okay, so you have an anxiety right here, let's overcome that. Mm-hmm. Or I would start with the end and work backwards. It would be a trial and error.
Yeah, it has been so far. And we've figured out a lot of the pieces of the puzzle, but yeah, this is what it keeps coming back to. And it is, you hit the nail on the head. It's what if we make this massive decision, we get all the way over there and it turns out to not be what, the right choice. And they're elderly. So, if they make that monumental of a decision and it turns out not to be the right one in hindsight, that's what she's terrified of right there. So yeah.
I'm thinking back to Milton Erickson, and a lot of what he does is very strength based on past successes, right? So mm-hmm. It sounds like my assumption, without having spoken to her, only based on the few sentences you've shared, is that she feels like she's made bad choices in the past.
That's the interesting thing, is that we've talked about that. Yeah. And she feels like she's actually made fairly good choices. However, there is the weight and the responsibility of being the primary decision maker in her family and even within her marriage. And so we're working on trying to let her surrender some of that power and control to her husband so that he can just do that, but she's really struggling to do that. So anyway, enough about my particular client, but I was just wondering how you would approach that, because it has been now, she's about to have her 4th session, and this one last component is just like, she'll be okay for a few days and then it just comes roaring back and you can't quite extinguish it entirely. So yeah. And it might be a situation where we can't extinguish it entirely and she's going to have to just expect that there's going to be a small amount and to just keep moving forward even with that,
So the one thing I would say is that if she experiences success with this protocol, it's so easy to just do it themselves as well.
Yeah.
Meaning if she feels, hey, I'm looking at the boxes, take a time out, go to the couch, just do it again. Try it again. Okay, see how it works.
I've given her a bunch of NLP stuff to do that with too, and she just keeps putting it on me. I think it might be a situation where I have to just let her go and be like, we've done all we can do. And yes, Kelly, she just wrote, have her visualize her future self and it working out. Like, we've done that to pieces. But anyway, I was going to mention something. When you were talking about the pre-frame and how important that is. And yeah, absolutely. Like getting them to understand the neuroplasticity of the brain and how we can pick up a trauma and have that response that quickly. And so therefore that would suggest that we can also have the positive trauma response. Is that what you called it? I think that's brilliant.
Positive trauma. The horrible phrase, especially people who have been traumatized. They're like, I don't want more trauma, even good ones.
No, but I mean, like what I think it fits. It totally fits, because
no, it fits.
Positive experiences, unless of course it's through like a mind-altering addictive substance, don't tend to take hold that quickly like a trauma does. So I think positive trauma like fits. But I was just going to add to that. Here's a metaphor that I often use, and anybody who's like been in this group for a while will recognize this because I use it a lot. But let's say that you have 5 people on a bus. The bus gets into an accident. Every single person is having the exact same experience and event, but it's their perception of it that turns it into whatever it becomes for them. So like, let's say one person walks off the bus and is just so incredibly grateful that they're alive, and it reminds them of their mortality. And now they're going to seize every moment, carpe diem. I'm never going to live my life in the shadows again. I'm going to take those risks, And then maybe the second person walks off the bus and is like, I'm going to give the bus a break for a little while. Like that was jarring, Third person is like, no buses ever again. That's it. I'm going to take taxi cabs, and the fourth person is like, no transportation ever again. I'm just going to walk everywhere. And then the last person gets off and goes home and never leaves their house again and becomes a complete agoraphobic. But they all have the exact same experience. It's just, it's a neutral event that each one attached a different narrative to. And so I use that as a pre-frame for similar, sorts of trauma and phobia work. And I just wanted to offer that because I think that along with what you said, it can help people sort of see that like, oh, I can have the same exact experience, but have a completely different perception. And that changes everything,
Right. If I were to use that pre-frame, I would probably end off with the last person having a very positive.
So switch it around.
Or even have more. It's funny. Somebody just shared with me that he was on an airplane, and there was such bad. Oh my goodness, I did not sleep so well last night. As Chris had mentioned, I have a whole bunch of little kids. Come on, you're on an airplane. It's shaking. Give me the word. What's the word?
Turbulence. Turbulence.
Thank you. And there was such bad turbulence that the pilot gets on the microphone and he goes, "Ladies and gentlemen, please make sure you stay, buckled in. We're having really bad turbulence." And then he kept talking, and then mid-sentence he's like, "Oh, right." So the pilot was saying this, and now everybody on the plane is like, "Ah!" And like one person, my friend was telling me, like one person was yelling, like, "Oh my goodness, we're gonna die!" And then out of nowhere, he said that there was a guy about 2 seats in front of him with a cowboy hat going. So I'm like, "Oh, let's take this thing down," right? Like, so this guy was like making the most of the experience, right? So,
oh my gosh.
So we all bring in different stories into the scenario.
Yeah.
But I would just say in terms of pre-frames, it's very important to always focus on the positive and the strength of it. Versus me, like the last thing they remember is agoraphobia. It's like,
Yeah. Okay. Point taken.
Just
so
a food
I
for
think
thought.
I'll switch it around, or maybe I'll just have that first person be at the very end so that it's that juxtaposition that's even like, grander. So thank you for that. Would anybody else like to ask any questions of Dunn? This turned into more of a spotlight instead of mastermind, but that's okay. I think he's got enough of a mind to master for all of us. So Matt Dixon, yes.
Hey, Dunn. I want to thank you for sharing this, and it's just it's great that you bring the academic part to it. I just love that. And so I think I understand the protocol, but I just want to review it really quick. So you have them take 3 deep breaths and then
Pre-frame first.
Pardon me. Oh, okay.
Pre-frame first.
Of course. Yes. So pre-frame, and then 3 deep breaths, and then visualize their ideal outcome.
First, starting when they know that they're safe.
When they know they're safe, yeah.
Right. So whatever that is, and you could discuss that with them already prior to doing any of this, and then going through the process, and then once they're on the other side of it, again, just give any indication that they're finished.
Okay. So when they know they're safe, and then they're on their own visualizing, and then they raise a finger when they're done, and then I guess you run it again, like you break state, then run it again.
Yeah. So then I would say, okay, we're going to do that again. This time I want you to make it bigger, louder, more real. And whenever you're done, just put up your finger. They do that. Then going into the third time, I said, okay, now we're going to do it one last time. So they know that this is the last time. Make it as big, as real, as incredible, full of emotions as you can possibly build it up for them, as you can possibly make it. And when you're done, again, just raise up your hand. And then when they've done that the third time, great. Now that you have a new piece of software, take as little or as long to install that, to update that. And whenever you're done, you can come back to the here and now. You can open your eyes, and I'll see you soon.
Okay. And cool. So then you have them put themselves in that, that old situation within, you prefer like within an hour or that day, correct?
Within a couple of hours to 24 hours, 36 max.
Okay. And
I'm just saying what I've experienced is that the success rate drops, right? Meaning from my personal experience, 8 or 9 times out of 10, if you're doing it within the first 24 hours, one session works exceptionally well, right? The same types of individuals after 24 hours to 36 hours, 7 to 8%, and then it just keeps dropping over time.
that's awesome. So do you do any sort of like testing, like is commonly done, like NLP or no? Okay.
Oh, well, the test is for them to go and experience it.
Gotcha. Okay.
Right. So when I did it, when I ended up training the therapist, I asked the client to do a SUDS before and after. SUDS, for anyone who doesn't know, is subjective units of distress, right? On a scale of 1 to 10, it's completely subjective. So whatever it is that they feel, normally if I'm in a dog park, like I'm at a 15, right? Like whatever it is, and then run the protocol and then ask them again post protocol and having experienced, let's say, going to the dog park, right? What was that like? Well, now it's at a 4. Now it's at a 2. Now it's at a 1. Now it's at a 7. Is there change? Is there no change?
And this could be why my client gets better for a few days, but then it gets worse because her thing that she's afraid of is so far in the future,
Yeah.
So yeah, dealing with the boxes, I think, is the way to go. Like the things that are triggering her right now about it.
Right now.
Yeah. Thank you.
And Dunn, I apologize. I don't remember. Is this something you came up with on your own?
It came out because of that. The one client I had who I literally had 10 minutes, I was like, oh crap, I gotta give him something, right? Because for the last 40 minutes, I was really just entertaining myself because I was so like flabbergasted by this individual. I was like, this doesn't make any sense to me. My worldview was so off when I met this individual. I was like, how is this possible? This guy's bringing in almost $1 million in his pocket at the end of the year, right? He's in his mid-40s. He's dressed well, all of these things, right? And even when he came into my office, he was sweating and like cleaning his forehead, right? He couldn't look me in the eyes, nothing.
It's like, what's it going to take, right?
So I basically, when I first started with, it's funny, when I first started going back now almost 20 years, I was on the verge of being, at least on the BMI scale, obese, right? I was like 1 pound away from being obese. And I would do all these different diets and detoxes and all these things. And, I'd lose weight here and there and I'd always put it back on. And then I just started with visualizations. I just would visualize myself. I'd go into like a very deep self-hypnosis. I didn't even realize it was called self-hypnosis or whatever it was. I would put myself in a very, very relaxed state. And then I would visualize things like, how do I want my body to act? How do I want it to, how do I want to be able to jump and bend and like pick up my kids and walk up the stairs and, and I would do it from I would sort of take my view outside and I would watch myself and then I'd put myself back in and I visualize myself like swinging through trees and like really being extremely active. And I would, do that cycle 3 times over and then I would come out. And then that was the thing that really helped me maintain my weight once I've lost it. And so I sort of just used that approach with him. And that's where it was born from.
Got it. The coolest thing I think for me was the way you taught your colleagues and their success was so great, with that. I just think that was really, really cool. So, but thank you for answering my question. That was awesome. This has been
My
great.
pleasure.
Yeah.
Now that you brought in like the colleagues, somebody shared with me, this is probably one of the most fascinating stories, that this protocol works too well. That was the words. I was like, what do you mean? So she said that she had a client who had agoraphobia and wouldn't leave her house, wouldn't leave the front gate. And she went to, to 3 different types of therapists, traditional therapists, went to Reikis, alternative healers, hypnotherapy, everything, right? Still nothing. And she ended up doing this process with her. And she ended up saying that later that afternoon, that she not only go out of her gate, but she lived in a very quaint sort of village, even went into the local, sort of strip, started schmoozing with the store owners, and was out for like 3 or 4 hours. Right? I was like, that's incredible. And she was so, the client themselves and her daughter were like so amazed by this. They're like, hey, let's plan next week to go on this cruise ship, not cruise, like they lived, I guess, here in Toronto, we have Lake Ontario. And if you go down to the lake, you can get on this nice big boat and you'll spend a half an hour on the boat and you'll go around. So wherever they lived, they had one of these boats about an hour away. So they planned it. They're like, oh my goodness, this is great, fantastic. We've talked about this in the past. So they're driving over there. And then they're about like 15 minutes away. And the mother's like, uh-oh. And the daughter's like, what? She's like, I'm starting to feel that anxiety again. She's like, well, what do you mean? I thought you were cured. She's like, me too. Right. And so they're like, okay, well, let's take it slow and we'll see. So as they're approaching the boat, right, now it's getting worse and worse and worse. She's like, I can't do it. So they ended up spending the afternoon, near the boat and around there. So what happened was in her visualization, she only visualized being, on the ground, like in, right, like where people normally are. So then she ended up going back to the therapist and doing another session with her regarding boats. And then they ended up having the boat trip.
That's hilarious. So you have to like predict all of the potential like scenarios that you'll be on when you're out there doing these ideal things. I love that.
It was a very humorous anecdote that I carry along with me.
Yeah, I actually suffered from agoraphobia off and on for like 13 years. So
Wow.
I know the pain. The pain is real. I was able to negotiate doing some things using EMDR therapy, but it wasn't until hypnosis that it actually like unlocked. I had 3 hypnosis sessions and 13 years of agoraphobia. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. So does anybody else have any questions? Yes, Christine.
Yes, thank you very much, Dunn. It's been fascinating. And I've just got a question is that I know somebody who has a phobia of spiders, and I was thinking this is going to be amazing for her because I've just recently said to her, maybe she needs some therapy for it. Now, once they've had the session, she's going to have to go on a spider hunt, isn't she? To try and find a spider then. So would it be feasible just to show her a photograph of the biggest tarantula going and see? Right, brilliant. Thank you.
I would say I'm going to share another funny anecdote in just a moment from a different therapist. If she's so afraid of spiders that she can't even see one on her phone on the screen, it would be a great way to test it.
Right.
What I would do is after you do the protocol and she's back, present with you, you speak about, again, the weather, stupid things, completely meaningless things for a bit, and then bring in, oh, by the way, let's see, right? Or have her pull up the phone. But I would give it a little bit of a break between coming out and then showing. The reason being is because I've experienced, this is my own theory, that when you expose the client right away, then they have a story that, oh, it's because we did it right away and I'm feeling great. But now that I've gone and I've left, or now that I have space, right, it's not gonna keep. So, but if you create a space within the therapeutic room, again, just a few minutes before coming back to it, at least subconsciously, there's the notion of like, okay, we did the work over here, right? And now we're over here. We're separated. That was over there. This is over now. And like, that's that. But when you do them together, it's like, no, that was over there. And now I'm back home and there's spiders over here and I can't deal with it. The funny anecdote regarding spiders is I have no idea where this person lived, but supposedly it was a COVID summer and an 8-year-old girl would stop going outside of her house because there were so many spiders outside and she was too afraid of spiders. And the mother was like at wit's end. She's like, I can't have this kid indoors anymore. Like, I need her out of the house. So they ended up going through the process. And then she said 2 days later, the girl's outside And she goes, "Hey mom, look." And like, so the mom comes outside and she's like, "Look, another one, bang, look, another one, bang." She's like, "No, stop that. You don't have to kill them just because you're not afraid of them anymore." So, but you know what? It was better, as the mother described. It's better that she's killing them than running away from them. So
Yeah, and honestly, if she was in their house, they would probably do the same to her. So
there you
Matt Dixon has one more question. On the whole, do you think it's necessary to get to the root cause? And I think I asked sort of a
You
similar
asked-
question, but go ahead.
right.
Yeah. Did you want to address that again, or should we move on?
In this context, I don't. For anxiety and phobias. When it comes to other elements of PTSD, right? Because there are other elements that aren't just, hey, I'm being triggered when this thing happens. Even in that scenario, I generally do not go and re-bring up the root cause. I know in things like at least some versions of EMDR, you literally are thinking about it while doing the desensitization in bilateral stimulation. And there's a lot of research that shows why it's successful. My general take in situations with PTSD is I use parts therapy. I use specifically IFS, internal family system. And the reason why I like it is because the client intuitively goes wherever they need to go to help with the trauma. And rarely does it ever have any abreactions.
Yeah.
So I usually don't probe. That's my default.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And if it's not necessary to re-trigger it, then I mean, by all means, I'm a fan for not doing that.
Yeah.
So my last question, which you should be prepared for right now, is what is the craziest, most unexpected, most shocking, most, I don't know, miraculous situation that you've ever had, either in a session or as a result of a session with one of your clients?
I'm gonna answer part of that question and change the rest of it. I'm currently in a situation that's extremely scary for me. I have a client who has agoraphobia. And I think I posted this also in your group and some other groups as well. I've never had a client like this, meaning I've never had a client who cannot relax, even just slightly. But this man's medical conditions are so difficult and dangerous. Like his doctors are saying, if you do not get to the hospital and to the doctor's offices to do these tests, you're going to die very, very shortly. In Canada, I don't know if it's Ontario or Canada, there's something called a Form 2, which if a loved one is willing to sign off, the police will come and forcibly take him to wherever he needs to be. And his wife is essentially on the verge of just calling the police and saying, "Where's that form? Because we need to get out of here." So in a certain way, I'm in a certain way, other than the Form 2, hypnosis is really the only option that he's got. My difficulty is that no matter what I've been trying, with all of my knowledge, I cannot break the wall of the pain that he's experiencing fast enough for him to get in a state where he can now accept suggestions. Which is why now I'm like re-going through conversational hypnosis. Essentially every free moment that I have, because I have another session with him on Monday, because I think that that's really my only option with him currently. And it's exceptionally scary, right? Because generally speaking, again, going back to those CBT, stats, even if you don't cure somebody, you can help them a lot very quickly within a number of sessions. This is like a race against the clock, plus nothing I'm doing is helping, right? So that's currently the situation I'm in, and it's the forefront of my mind as well.
Yeah. I think I mentioned this in the group too, and I'm sure you've already considered it. So please forgive if I sound like I'm just being Captain Obvious here, but maybe you know, more of the Elman anesthetic sort of thing, starting with glove anesthesia and just trying to get it throughout his body. Is he even able to like relax enough to experience that, like the dripping of the cold onto the fingers and letting it know?
I've tried so much, and that's why I keep going to, if I can figure out conversational hypnosis, I by no stretch of the imagination do I have enough experience, knowledge, expertise in whatsoever. But from my experience going with him, as I mentioned, I think it's the only way that I can see to have success with him.
Yeah. I do have a resource that I'm going to just send you in direct message that just check it out and see what you think.
Okay.
Might be helpful. So
By all means.
Yeah.
Pretty much right now, I'm going back to a 1960s textbook put out by Milton Erickson and his main protege. The book is called Hypnotherapy. It's a hardcover book, phenomenal book for anybody that's interested to read. And it's all conversational, right? 100% conversational, and breaks down the whole premise of inductions and incredibly well. And then at the same time, I'm also going through Igor's conversational hypnosis, multiple day, many hours seminar as well. But I really do believe that that's my only goal. If you want to hold on, let me grab the book for you.
he said Erickson, right? I thought Elman wrote that book, but I guess we'll find
It's
out.
this book right here. Oh, 1979. It's this one right here.
Oh, it is Erickson. Okay.
Phenomenal book. A bit thick, but absolutely incredible book.
Well, thank you. Thank you for that. I don't have that book, so I will definitely put that on my list.
I missed that. Who was the author of the book?
It's
Erickson.
Milton Erickson,
Okay, good.
the godfather of conversational hypnosis and hypnotherapy as we know it, and Ernest Rossi, which is his main protege.
Well, does anybody else have any last minute questions before we go ahead and call it a day here? Yes, Christine.
Sorry, I did put it in the chat because I didn't want to interrupt everybody or anybody again. It's just because my attention got diverted for a couple of sentences earlier on, and I just wanted to double check and confirm whether before the visualization you put the client into hypnosis or you just sort of kept them into a relaxed state.
Not unless the client is really averse to the process.
Right.
I actually prefer not bringing them into a hypnotic state.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. It's just that then I because I missed a sentence or two, I've been questioning myself. I thought I had to ask you, silly as though it may seem.
I think it was just
But
like
thank you.
3 deep breaths, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting, my theory as to why do all these meditations and yoga and all of these things start off with deep breaths. And my assumption is that breathing is an automatic system, is an automatic, response in our body. And when we take control of our breathing, we're unconsciously telling ourselves that we have more control over things that are not in our control normally than we think. Right? I did this exercise with my daughter where I had one of these finger heart rate monitors, right? My 8-year-old daughter, she's 9? No, she's 9 now. And I said to her, I want you to drop your heart rate. She said, well, how do I do that? I was like, I don't know, you figure it out. So she just sat there and then it slowly started dropping. Right? And I said to her, that's all it takes, right? Like, meaning that you have so much more control over your own body. The reason why I did it with her specifically is because she's got ADHD, like intense, which is not a problem in itself, except that her intensity when it comes to the other children is very jarring for them and makes them feel very unsafe. Right. So, and I explained to her, you have a certain level of responsibility for your own body and your own actions. Because, just because you're bored and want to yell in the baby's ear doesn't mean that it's good for the baby. Right. So you need to be able to control. She's like, well, I can't control it. I was like, well, that's BS. Like, I'll show you how you can control things that you think you don't have control over.
That's brilliant. I love that you put that in her hands and so early on in life too. You know, I feel like if the client that I have that I was talking about had that put in her hands early on in life. She wouldn't keep putting the responsibility of her healing on my shoulders. And then it would last longer than 3 days, you know?
Yeah.
I was
teaching
just going to
the
say,
trick.
Christine, I did write down everything that Dunn taught us today, and it's in the chat now. If you just click over on the right-hand side.
Brilliant.
Yeah. So you guys can copy and paste it if you want. I was just
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks.
absolutely. And also, if anybody wants to donate $2 a month to the cause of these wonderful little live Zoom calls, feel free. The link is just above where I typed out Dunn's protocol. And Dunn, you probably have a much better version of it. So if you want to just post that in the group or even attach it as a file in the group, please feel free. I was getting enough questions about it that I went ahead and typed it up and put it in there. Just the quick and dirty version.
I'll tell you honestly, I actually was on Kajabi at one point and I had this whole process with video and examples, like actual case studies as well. And then I just stopped my subscription there and I lost all the files. So I don't have, your version is probably the best one that's out there right now.
I think all of 6 sentences, so I don't know, but.
So that's the beautiful thing about it. It's very, very simple and very quick, meaning
And
it
I
doesn't
love that.
be so intense.
Yeah.
But with your permission, I do have one question that I'm just sort of, there's an idea that I'm starting to toy with, and I'd love to hear people's feedback, just ideas on it. Can I take that a minute?
Of course. Yes. Anyone who doesn't have time, you can go ahead and just quietly leave. And if you do have time, stick around.
So one of the things that I find very imperative, at least in the realm of psychotherapy, is that it's highly regulated. And because of that, there's things like supervision that's necessary for you to have. And I found that when I was studying hypnosis and hypnotherapy, you know, I did my course and then like that was that. And I didn't have an outlet other than maybe, you know, forums and asking questions. And now I was thinking, again, just for informal, just to become better hypnotherapists, is there an interest, would anyone be interested in joining a supervision group where essentially, you know, we get together a couple of times a week, open forum, people bring their cases, we go around, we try and help individuals solve, you know, either their business problems or their client problems, just to become better therapists. That's really just the premise behind it, because there might be something out there right now. If there is, you can share that with me. But
Well, that's kind of the premise of this group, but we're not doing it in a supervisory sense. So Dunn, if you would like to come on board as a co-moderator, I would be more than happy to just say, here's the keys to the tiny little kingdom that we have. And you can certainly do that.
Okay, so you know what, maybe you and I will discuss this further then.
Yeah. I mean, there's I think around 800 people in here, and I'm sure that there's at least a few that would love to have some sort of a supervisory, you know, consortium to come together. I would love that. I just don't know. I can't commit to hosting something like that right now.
Okay. So again, you and I will talk, and we can. But I'm getting at least 2 people saying, oh, 3. Okay.
Yep, there's 4 so far. So yeah, because like the name of this group is Hypnotherapy Uncensored : Building a Better Practice.
Right.
So it's all about like whatever that takes, whether that's case studies, whether that's business, whether, you know, like all of the above. So yeah, I would love that.
Okay.
And I'll be there sometimes.
All right.
With my own cases and questions. So
there you go.
And I don't have the background that you have. Mine is applied psych. It wasn't, you know, I never went farther than that, but that was my love. I loved the research side, the, you know, the Skinner boxes and the learning how the brain works and learning how learning works, and, you know, all that operant conditioning, classical conditioning, all the fun stuff. So,
right. Okay. Beautiful.
The research heavy stuff.
Thank you very much, Krista.
Yeah, thank you so much too, Dunn. It was a pleasure to have you. And I'm sorry that it didn't end up being a whole mastermind, but I think that this was great because we really got like to hone in on this one particular protocol that I think every single person in here is going to put to use right away. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm getting thumbs up. So, all right. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week, everyone. And I'll see you in 2 weeks with the next Spotlight guest host. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.